Good morning. Cheers. Okay. Sounds like audio is working. And let me just double check. Yep, I think we are good. Well, today's coffee is a highly overpriced Costa Rican geisha coffee. And honestly, I, yeah, I am not enough of a connoisseur to appreciate the price tag associated with this coffee. But it was an interesting experiment. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about warning signs for ERP partners. And this kind of was a spin-off of a discussion that a session we had at DynamicsCon Live in Scottsdale, Arizona, earlier in the year. And it was, I think the topic was implementation best practices, but we got into all sorts of like, not tips, but like, look out for this. We recommend you do this, all, in different directions from the partner side, from the customer side. And one angle of that was implementation best practices for both partners and customers. And a little bit of twist on that are not so good implementation practices that a partner may see in a customer or a customer may see in a partner. So this is one episode in that exploration. So let's talk about warning signs for ERP partners. Okay, so what do I mean by a warning sign? I would characterize this generally as a sign of potential project risk. Each one of these could potentially just be a clue that something may not be going well, or that although things may seem great at the moment, you may run into some issues down the road in this project. And not always, right? But in my experience, they tend to point towards some fundamental issue that's going to bubble up at some point. And the sooner you recognize this, in my humble opinion, the sooner you see these signs, the sooner you have recognition internally, processes, procedures, conversations with the customer, the better. Ignoring these things doesn't tend to make anyone better off. And these may not be fun conversations that you may need to have, or you may need to do a lot of additional work to compensate these things if you don't want to bring it up, or if the customer doesn't want to address them. So the real challenge with these is I've often only identified these in hindsight. It's only after that project puts you through the ringer and you're just done at the end of the project and you just say, finally, my gosh, why was that so bad? Why was that so difficult? And then if you look back and you start to see some of the signs and some of the clues that may have led to the problems that you experience. So by no means is this easy, obvious, and that's why I'm trying to share some of them. And not an all-inclusive list. You may have yours that you have experienced. These are just some that came off the top of my head that I can kind of communicate. Often potentially subtle. You won't really be able to identify them in the moment, and they're easily overlooked during the project when you're excited to sell this new project, you're excited to have this proposal, you're building a team, you're trying to get stuff done. The heat of the moment, you're like, oh, great, let's get started. You're more willing, it seems, to overlook some of these red flags or warning signs, I'll just say. And the next challenge is, even if you might think you are seeing some of these warning signs and like they're kind of in the back of your head, without some explicit discussion, explicit policies, procedures to identify and potentially mitigate. It's like, okay, we see this and we're a little concerned. What do we do about it? Unless you have acknowledged that process of what to do about it, you may just kind of say, well, we'll just kind of deal with it later. And then the big question is, Can you actually do anything to mitigate or address this risk? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Maybe if you do, you will lose the project. That's a real trade-off, right? It's like, no customer, sorry, we are unable to accommodate that request. It's just not how we do things. It's not how we run our projects. That raises some significant risk to the project. We're unwilling to do that. And what if they go to another partner? What if they talk to someone else who is willing to make those compromises? Are you willing to accept that? And so, do you have the ability or the integrity to say no when some of these things come up, or to bring them up, have that discussion? Doesn't happen often in my experience. And if you do not mitigate, if you do not address these, if you do not have these discussions and put measures in place, are you willing to accept the subsequent risk? And many people say, sure, it's not a big deal. Well, I've seen the consequences of not addressing these risks, and they can result in failed implementations where everyone's unhappy, or they can result in a very, very nasty lawsuit that can just put the partner out of business. And if the partner doesn't address these early on, you could be accepting the risk of literally getting wiped out. Just the lawsuit will destroy you financially. So it's a very real risk, and there's not clear answers on how to weigh those risks, right? So the number one, I was going to kind of try to order these, number these, rank these, but I kind of gave up because there were too many, and I didn't want to stick this at the end because I know a lot of people just watch the first few minutes. So TLDR, number one, no end users involved. I have seen this over and over and over. Things like, no, you don't need to talk to any of the end users. I'll give you all the information that you need. I know everything about the processes, about the company, about our business requirements, not a problem. I'm the IT manager. I know what all the users do. I supervise all this stuff. I see them use the software. I manage their computers and systems. I'll take care of it. Management consultants as project managers. So you have the customer management, you have the customer users. They then hire management consultants who manage the project implementation and bring you in, perhaps one of several teams to implement. You're the ERP implementation team. Maybe they have a CRM implementation team. Maybe they have a SaaS service provider that they're also using. That's third party. So you could be the ERP team coordinating with the SaaS configure, maybe they manage the Azure environment, and then there's someone else who does CRM, and there's some other system, and you're all having to coordinate all through a external management consultants who are working for the customer. That's perhaps the worst. I've been through that. It does not go well. Had a few cases where there was an interim person, so CFO, CEO, accounting manager, whatever. They are kind of working for the customer, but they are an interim contractor, and they take that role, and they say they can handle the communication with the client. And in short, the red flag, the warning sign is that you, as the ERP implementation partner, do not have direct access to and direct communication with end users, the ones who are typing in the sales invoice, who are sending out the vendor payments, who are managing the warehouse and doing the picks from the warehouse. If you do not have access to those end users, I consider that a big warning sign. I've seen it again and again. The example is, I was working with the IT manager of this smaller company, and he says he knew everything. He, with confidence, told me what this business process was. Finally, one day, after a couple months of development of a complex application, the end user comes in, he explains what we've done, and she sits there and says, "That is not what we do." And he says, "What do you mean? You do X, Y, and Z." She says, "No, we don't. That's not at all what we do. That's totally wrong." So the application was designed and developed based on the confident assertions of the IT manager. Finally, when I get an end user involved, it's all wrong. All wrong. But of course, that's my fault because I should have known that, and no additional budget, no change requests. So you can see how this can go south very quickly. The farther you go down that road of a project without any interaction with end users to validate requirements, validate business processes, validate how things are actually done on the ground, the higher the risk goes, in my humble opinion. And my euphemism for this is end user proximity. The farther away you are from those end users, the higher the risk you face in your projects, at least in what I've done. So that is a fun one. And if you ignore the rest of what I said, I would say this is the number one for me. There are many others, right? Okay, next up, classic. Sales call quote. You're on a sales call. It's the initial sales call. Customer says, so can you give me a rough estimate of how much it's going to cost us to implement Business Central? Just a ballpark. That's all I need. I'm not going to hold you to it, right? Are we talking 40 hours? Are we talking 400 hours? Just give me a ballpark, right? I need to know. And anyone who falls into that trap, I feel for you. Or I feel for you if you get that question. If you fall into that trap, unfortunately, that's on you. It is a dangerous road to go down. And salespeople, partners are so tempted to try to give an answer. They want to give an answer. Well, aren't you an expert? How can you not know, like, whether we're talking 40 or 400? It's the initial sales call. You've had a 1-hour call with a customer, a prospect. You know nothing about their business. Don't do it. It's a trap, right? And then maybe you have a second call, and it's kind of a scoping call to understand what's in, what's out. We talking CRM, or we talking inventory management, or we talking warehousing, distribution, manufacturing. After that second scoping call, so can you get me a quote by Thursday so I can present it to the board? We have a board meeting on Friday. Really want to give them a heads up on this project so we can get it in our next year's budget. Like, you can scramble to try and slap something together, but after less than 2 hours of conversations with a new prospect, complex business processes, you are going to pay sooner or later for offering those numbers to the customer. Maybe you are so good that you know how to do this. I'm not that good. I recognize it. I can't ballpark it. And as soon as you offer a number, there's actually a psychological term for that, and that's called anchoring. And if you offer 250 hours as your ballpark estimate, that serves as a psychological anchor. And when you offer a proposal after several more scoping calls, requirements analysis of 400 hours, what? You told me it was 250. Now it's 400. What did you do? Why are you trying to rip me off? So really, really dangerous territory. I understand the customer's need for these numbers, desire to have them, but there is a process to come up with these estimates, and throwing them out there during a very early calls, warning signs, right? Well, once you come up with your proposal, you spend several hours at a minimum coming up with an estimate, breaking down tasks, understanding requirements, scope, how you're going to do things, preliminary design, whatever your process is. I've had a customer come back to me on a totally custom project, never done before, for their business. Wow, that's a lot more than I expected. Really? You sell coffee. How did you come up with an expectation for how much a custom software project would cost? Are you somehow a programmer and coffee reseller? Like, how does that work? And wow, that's a lot more than I expected. Well, maybe your expectations are wrong. And sure enough, it was downhill from there. After that call, just problem after problem after problem with the customer's expectations and demands and non-payment. And that should, there's half of my list is devoted to this one customer. So more than I expected. with zero frame of reference, zero context, zero experience in this field, the customer is suddenly an expert in assessing ERP implementation or custom development quotes. Warning sign. I now know it. Now look out for it and say, whoa, okay, we need to stop. There's a problem here right away. Whether you say that, whether you recognize it internally, you just need to recognize it. Can you do it for less? I know you're saying it's going to be 800 hours, but yeah, that's pretty expensive. Can you do it for less? Yeah, just like reduce the hours. I'm sure it'll be fine. So, customer, what would you like to cut? Can we cut data migration? Because we have, 60 hours for data migration. We'll just won't import your bank statements, your GL balances, your vendor balances. That's cool, right? That'll save time. Well, no, we have to have that. Okay. What about financial reports? No financial reports. Let's just exclude those because, we have at least 40 hours on your basic financial reports. We can skip those, right? Well, no, we kind of need those. Huh. So what would you like to cut? Oh, training, of course. Let's cut training. We don't need training. That's a classic. No documentation, because that's at the end anyway. It's kind of just, we're just checking a box with documentation. How about project management? Yeah, we do not need a project management. Our users are very capable. I'm sure we could coordinate without a project manager. Cool. That'll save us some time, right? Can you do it for less? And a corollary of that one is, wow, you guys charge $175 an hour. That's outrageous. I talked to a guy who charges $90 an hour. That was actually a conversation I had many years ago. I think our rate was 150, 160, 165, something like that. And this person who literally had the boxed ERP software on the floor of his office, he told me, he's like, yeah, I've got the box right here. I just need help implementing it. That tells you how long ago it was, and also tells you how long he's had that software sitting on the floor of his office. He said, yeah, I just need you to help me install it and get it set up. Well, I talked to a guy who charges $90 an hour. I'm like, call him. Good luck. Bye. Never heard from him again. Probably didn't implement it. So yeah, can you do it for less? We need to go live in 6 weeks. One case I had was the renewal for our current ERP system. I don't know if it's doubles or triples. It was some outrageous increase. Doubles in 6 weeks. We have to go live when it expires because we can't afford to pay that. And we're going to lose access to our current system when we don't pay for it. So think about that. We have 6 weeks to go live, and that's like on the second phone call. Don't know the requirements, don't know the scope. It was an interim CFO, zero access to end users. It was the creme de la creme of warning signs. No. That's the simple answer to this one. No. Now, if you know it's 2 users, a $2 million company, GLAPAR, they're coming from QuickBooks, and you have been able to scope this and you're confident with that, maybe you could pull this off. But in that scenario, you typically wouldn't have these constraints of, $20,000 annual increase in their ERP subscription. But the answer to this one, for me, no. Will not promise that. We don't need training. This is an old classic, right? Can you cut training down? Isn't 2 days of training enough? Why do we need a week of training? That's overkill, right? Come on. It's just an ERP system. How different can it be? How hard can it be? My people are really good. We've been doing AP, AR, GL for years. Isn't 2 days of training enough? Can you just train Sally and she'll train the 12 other users in AP, AR, invoicing, sales, financial reporting, warehouse, manufacturing, fixed assets, reporting? Yeah, that's a good approach. Just train Sally. That'll save time. Our users don't have time for training on top of their work. Legitimate concern, right? These users are already working 40 hours a week or more, fighting the old system, fighting the IT issues, fighting new requests, dealing with phone calls, serving customers. They don't exactly have a week to just sit around and do nothing. And how do you take users out of rotation for a week of training? It's a challenge, legitimate challenge. Great way to cut the budget is to cut training, saves time, saves money. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? No client project manager. So if there is no single person to plan, review requirements, give feedback, communicate with the customer internally, coordinate meetings, identify who the responsible person is for a given task, and just get people involved and coordinate the customer side of a project, I would say that's a warning sign. And it's like, well, aren't you the expert? Aren't you the project manager? Can't you manage the project? Yes, on the partner side, but there are still things that need to be coordinated and managed on the customer side. So someone at least as the primary contact to help serve as the client's project manager. Just like the old system, this is almost a trope. Anyone who's implemented ERP knows this one. When you enter a project and they want everything to be like the old system, it's going to be rough. We need these custom fields from our old system. You might think, okay, I understand. These are kind of unique business processes, and these fields help coordinate that. So, yep. Okay, one or two, three, four, maybe. But when you got 27 of those, you kind of wonder, there's a functionality gap. Old system, new system. Are we doing something wrong? Well, that's more steps than our old system. When everything refers to the old system, you're starting to get warning signs of lack of adoption and lack of understanding that this is a fundamental change and this is a new system. It operates differently. So when it's two more steps than your old system in this one process, if that's unacceptable, that's a warning sign. We need this custom report that we had from our old system. Okay, understandable for one or two of those. When all of the reports are custom reports that are replicated from the old system, mimicking that, and I have a good story about this where you say, well, who uses this? And no one knows. Why is it called this? And no one knows. It's just this report they've been doing for so long. No one knows who created it. No one knows why it exists. No one knows what it tells anyone. And yeah, so they're just carrying over things from their old system because that's what they're doing today. A classic one is, wait, you're telling me that Business Central doesn't have this feature? Our old system has this feature. Our old system can do this. Why can't this fancy Business Central do that? Referencing the old system. And similar vein, our old system did that automatically. Why is this 7 steps? Why do we need to go through an order to a warehouse shipment to an invoice and release stuff and post stuff? Our old system just did it, right? And, QuickBooks does this. Why doesn't Business Central? Yep, warning sign. We need to migrate all historical data. We have 80 gigabytes of data that need to be migrated from our old system. We have to have it. It's essential. And nope, that is a requirement. We need at least 3 years of detailed historical data. That's a common one that I've heard in the US with several customers who their rationale is we need that because we are planning to go public. We're pre-IPO. That's a common phrase in the US. We're a pre-IPO company, and it makes them feel good and quite an ego oftentimes. And they think, because they got some VC capital that they're pre-IPO and they are going to go public and make billions of dollars. And as a result, in order to appease the investment bankers and auditors who are going to roll through their shop, they need at least 3 years of detailed historical data in their new ERP system. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's a common refrain. And so 3 years could be quite a bit of data. Can you do that? Sure. Does it present some challenges? Yes. Does it bloat your, say, new Business Central environment? Yes. Does it take more time? Yes. It's not one of those like critical red flags, but it's just one of those common issues that it's like, okay, we're going to have a challenge here. So you need to budget appropriately. You need to set expectations. And you just need to be aware of the complications that occur when you're migrating a whole bunch of messy historical data from an old system. That never happens. This is also a classic. So we never have a customer that needs X. Wait, you sure? So all of your customers have this set up? Yep, all of them, no exceptions. Quotes will always need this on them, no exceptions. Invoices are always the same, no exceptions. These taxes can be hard-coded. It's only one city and it's only one rate. It's never going to change. Yes, because taxes never change. Governments, whether city, county, state, federal, they never want more taxes or additional taxes. Boy, this is just a classic one. And anyone who's a developer who's written a single line of code, you know not to hard code something because it's just going to change in the future. And no matter what the customer says about there are no exceptions, there is always an exception. And a customer recently told me, yeah, this can always appear in an invoice. Really? Even when it's a service invoice and not a product invoice? Oh yeah, you're right. But right before I asked that question, you could ask them how certain they are of that assertion, and they would say 100%. 100%. All invoices need this wording on it. Really? Even when you're not selling those products? Oh, yeah, you're right. There are a few customers that don't receive those products, therefore that message would make no sense. Yeah, we need 2 invoices now. It's just a classic. So it's one of those things, anytime you hear always, never, no, that would never happen, no exceptions, there's an exception, right? Kind of like the English language, there's an exception to every rule. We're too busy, and kind of mentioned this before. Users don't have time to attend requirements meetings. Oh yeah, Bob couldn't make it. He's just got too many calls. This is a meeting to discuss financial reporting, and Bob is your controller or CFO or accounting manager, whatever. If Bob isn't here, we're like, what's the point of this meeting? It's kind of important that he attend the financial reporting requirements meetings, right? We don't have time to work on design. Can't you just do it? We can't spend a week training users. That's just too much time. Can't you manage the project? You're the expert, so just manage it for us. And yeah, we're really busy. Warning sign. Another one I've seen is, we need to prevent user mistakes. And this isn't just 1 or 2 mistakes. You just keep going down the road. We need to prevent any user mistakes. Can you make all of these fields read-only? We don't want anyone to make any changes to any field on this page, but they need to view the page and they need to change these 2 fields. Can you do that? We just don't want anyone to mess up. We only want to allow certain users to change certain fields. And these users can change these fields. These users can change these fields, but only on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And only after the document has progressed past this stage. And, I want you to add custom validation to these freeform text fields just to make sure they don't mistype something or misspell something or enter the wrong value. No, we can't have pre-validated like a dropdown or lookups because that's too restrictive. We have situations where they need to type notes, but we don't want them to type the wrong notes or mistype the notes. So can you do that for us? That would be great. They'll go to all this great lengths to validate field level stuff, but they'll miss some big items like, oh, no, we never have duplicate payments. That's not an issue, right? No, we don't need change logging. But then 6 months later, wait, who made this change? How do we tell? Wait, how come you didn't turn on change logging, partner? You should have known we needed this. So they'll they'll miss kind of these bigger picture solutions, and they'll be so focused on granular field level things like read-only field level security or field level validation. So, red flags. That ISV is too expensive. $200 a month, that's crazy. I'm not going to pay for that. We'd rather develop our own credit card integration and customer payment portal because that's going to be so much cheaper than $200 per month. But we pay $200 a month forever. Yes, and you get support and updates and fixes and changes and refinements. But yeah, you go ahead and try to develop that very complex solution on your own. And another variant is, well, that ISV solution, it only handles 80% of our requirements, so it's not worth it. So let's go and custom develop our own solution. Okay, that might be an option, but just be aware of what you're getting into with this. I have a customer where a sales tax calculation solution didn't handle all of their taxes and fees. So, okay, let's develop a custom. It is not going well. How hard could it be to build an omni-channel e-commerce solution from scratch? Been there. It is much harder than you could possibly imagine. Let's integrate with Amazon and Walmart and Home Depot and, every other retailer and e-commerce platform on the planet, each of which has its own requirements for product listing, pricing, payment acceptance, refunds, shipping, reporting, customer communication. It is crazy. And if you think that buying an omni-channel e-commerce solution is expensive, whoa, just wait until you try to develop one on your own. It will teach you a lesson. Partner, that should have been included. So this is a painful one. This typically happens later in a project when a new requirement is discovered or sprung on you, or, well, obviously we do that. So some statements you may hear that hit you with this warning sign. I would have expected you to know that we needed this. It's the partner clairvoyance feature that you may not have had installed. So you should have known that they needed this particular field, this functionality, this business process, this report, right? Well, isn't it obvious that we needed this industry-specific tax calculation on our invoices? You should have thought of that. That was obvious. That's a core requirement. Partner, how did you not see this coming? Your proposal included financial reporting. So why aren't all 37 of our reports included in that proposal? It says financial reporting should have been included. Not my problem. Part of your engagement letter. You said financial reporting. You must deliver. A variant is, well, you're the experts. How did you not anticipate this? You claim to be an expert in Microsoft Dynamics. How did you not anticipate that I needed 4 different fixed asset books and calculations of depreciation methods in 17 states? How did you not know this? You're the experts, right? So, partners, I'm sure you're familiar with many of these. I'm sure you have your own, but I thought that was just some of the things that I've come across. And the bigger question is, how do you recognize these early? How do you identify them before you're 80% through the project and run into these landmines? And how do you have internal procedures, processes, and communications on your team to recognize these when they happen, before they happen, as soon as they happen? Stop when you hear them, have a meeting internally, and have the strength to pause, address them with the customer, and be able to have that communication where you say, this is a project risk, we need to address it before we proceed. Or you choose whether or not you address it or not. Very easy to ignore them. Very easy to not hear them, not identify them. Very easy to try to wishfully ignore them, thinking they're not going to be a problem down the road. And very easy to say, oh, we got this, right? Like, okay, I understand this risk, but we'll mitigate it through X, Y, and Z without discussions with the customer to have a compromise. Because if the customer does not have to compromise at the pre-sales stage, the sales stage, the quote stage, the estimate stage, the statement of work stage, the design stage, scoping, budgeting, all along the way, it's not going to get any better as the project progresses. So I strongly recommend some internal communications to talk about these warning signs, recognize them, and have some type of standard process where, okay, we agree that if the customer wants to cut training, here's how we're going to address this in theory, right? We're going to at least have a conversation with the customer says this is not going to work. So let me know what your warning signs are, partners, how you recognize them, how you address them, what conversations you have with customers, because they're not always going to be fun, right? And it could result in a customer saying that's not acceptable. I'm going to go find someone else. Do you have the integrity to say no and walk away from a project if you have multiple glaring high-risk warning signs, right? At some point, you're incurring a significant amount of risk on a project. And if a customer is adamant about not accepting any of that risk, I don't think it's going to get better once you're $100,000, $200,000 into a project, right? And they're going to hold your feet to the fire. So with that, enjoy your weekend and cheers.